morning, everyone. My name is Eli Dvorkin. I'm the editorial and policy director at Center for an Urban Future. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be moderating today's panel. So feel free to make yourselves comfortable, and I will kick things off by introducing our terrific panelists. So we are joined today by Carlina Rivera. Carlina is a council member in the New York City Council representing District 2, which spans from Murray Hill, I think just a couple blocks away, sorry, Councilmember Powers, down to the Lower East Side, where she was born and raised. Since taking office in 2017, Councilmember Rivera has championed issues around affordable housing, small business survival, public transit, and healthcare equity, just to name a few. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you here today.
Thank you.
We're also joined today by Eric Kleinenberg. Eric is the Helen Gould Shepard Professor of Social Science and Director of the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University. He's also the author of several books, including the brilliant Palaces for the People, How Social Infrastructure Can Help Fight Inequality, Polarization, and the Decline of Civic Life, which, it must be said, is a must-read for anyone in the room today. If you haven't already, you can check it out right here in this branch. And it's great to have you with us, Eric.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
We're also joined today by Katie Knight. Katie is the executive director of the Siegel Family Endowment, a philanthropic foundation that supports work at the intersection of learning, workforce, and infrastructure. Katie previously worked at 2 Sigma and at Google, and has long been a champion for infrastructure and policies that can help close the digital divide and expand access to opportunity in an increasingly digital world. Thanks for being with us, Katie.
Thank you.
And we're also joined today by Bita Mostafi. Bita is a longtime immigrant rights advocate and human rights organizer and the former commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs here in New York. Among many other highlights, Bita spearheaded the ID NYC outreach campaign and helped design the Action NYC Legal Services Program, which was operated in partnership with the city's libraries. Welcome, Bita. Great to have you. So kicking things off today, Eric, I'd like to start with you because you literally wrote the book on the subject. You write so persuasively, so passionately about the role of public libraries as social infrastructure and how these shared social spaces can help combat inequality, which is really the theme today. Thinking about all of this, of course, before New York City encountered a global pandemic that has in so many ways deepened those very divides that you write about and further accelerated in many ways the inequalities that we see around us. So what do you see now as the role of public libraries coming through, but certainly not out of this pandemic period, in helping New York City emerge from this crisis? And maybe most importantly, how can city leaders harness that social infrastructure you write about to fight these inequalities that COVID has exacerbated?
So I think, as many people have said today, and I'm sure as we'll probably all agree on this in this room, we have this extraordinary resource in every neighborhood in the city that is in some ways overutilized because they're too busy, there's too much demand for their services, and in some ways underappreciated and clearly without the resources they need. So, I always like to talk about this famous article by The Economist in Forbes who called for abolishing all libraries, knocking them down because he hadn't seen enough economic data proving their cash value. He wanted to replace them with Amazon stores. And I like to think about what would have happened in the pandemic, if we didn't have libraries. I think about all the kind of digital services they provided, the expanded Wi-Fi access, the classes for children, for older people. And now the question is, can you supercharge all of that and integrate the libraries into New York City's revitalization, neighborhood by neighborhood? And we saw some data on this report, which I'm eager to read earlier. I don't think there's anything else like it in the city. A place that's a safe place, it's an accessible place that caters to people at different ages, different social classes, different ethnic groups. That's a true gathering place. And so, it seems to me like it's a moment for those of us who share that view to find a way to work together. And I guess what I'm trying to say is it seems to me less like the burden on us now is to get the argument. We have the argument, we have the evidence, it's here in this report. The real question is whether this is going to be the moment when we mobilize to try to pressure the new mayor and get the new mayor's support, and also to gather resources that are potentially coming from the federal government to do something life-changing. So sorry for being so long-winded about that, but I can't emphasize enough how significant this moment is for the issue that so many of us care about.
Well, Councilmember, I see you nodding your head. Obviously, you and your colleagues have been investing in libraries in recent years, had pushed back on on the potential for library cuts, saw those, the budget restored. But obviously, in the context of several years now, I've seen the libraries receive more city funding, more capital dollars. I think so much of what we've heard so far today, though, suggests that it's really not enough. That libraries are still barely funded enough just to keep pace with inflation over the past 15, 20 years. A stat that's in our report is that libraries are actually doing all of this now with 15% fewer staff than a decade ago. And now we're putting a lot more on the plates of libraries in this meeting today, talking about all the ways that libraries can do more, but not do more with less, not even do more with, I think, the current level of funding. So how do you see, kind of, to Eric's point, that there is agreement here, there's consensus, we're excited to hear it in the room, but what should the city council, their next mayor, do to increase or to build a pathway toward greater harnessing of libraries' potential, and where specifically would you like to see those investments directed?
Well, again, thanks for having me, and it's good to see everyone. I feel like the first step is kind of acknowledging that libraries are social infrastructure. They're also part of our general infrastructure. So the way that we discuss city hospitals and transit and public housing, these are public spaces that are absolutely critical to our holistic well-being, but also professional development, personal development. I think about when I was a kid and how much I needed the library. It was like another parent. It was summer school. It was after school. It was where I've read, books and met librarians that I will take with me for the rest of my life. And I think there's about 217 branches, more or less, across the city. And that sounds like a lot, but there are a lot of New Yorkers who are in desperate need of resource centers. So I think as the city council continues to invest, and I think a couple years ago we kind of hit this unprecedented number for investment, they're also evolving, right? They're becoming different spaces. They're not just books, they're computers, they're community centers, and I think we're putting a lot of expectations on our library systems to also become these sort of hubs where people also go for information, especially on public health. And I think that we have to fund that mandate. I mean, I've used the library to do mobile office hours because I know not everyone could kind of, go to where my mobile office is, which is kind of in the middle of where I consider my district the neediest. But people in other parts of the area want to access their elected official. So, I was listening to, I think it was just yesterday, maybe an interview on Marketplace about this kind of Department of Care idea and how we're looking to incorporate care more into our economy and how we're designing a city. And libraries are at the core of that. So we have to put more money into it, not just to upgrade the facilities, because I'll have to close my local branch where I grew up because we desperately need to update the HVAC, which is really important. But also the personnel, as was mentioned. You have the unhoused New Yorkers going into libraries to get warm. You have people where it's the only place they can access tech. But librarians also have a special set of skills and expertise, and they need to be able to fully realize that. And so we have to make sure that they have the support to help individuals and contact maybe these unhoused New Yorkers who need help navigating what could be a very bureaucratic and intimidating system of services. So I think they need the help that maybe they're not all librarians in the library, but they need to be able to focus on their expertise. And then we also need to make sure that as these spaces evolve, that we're investing in them the way we invest in any general infrastructure. And I think the city council has a responsibility to do that and to step up.
Well, thank you for that. And by the way, I love your shout out for Justin Garrett Moore's Department of Care idea, which he presented for the first time in this very room at a CUP event just a few weeks ago. So there's the role of libraries yet again. Well, Bita, let me ask you something that I think builds on both of those points, but gets at some of the specifics around what the need is today. I think everyone agrees with Eric that the case for libraries is incredibly strong, stronger than ever. But there may be less understanding about the ways in which the needs that have only grown during the pandemic could potentially be met by libraries with a new level of investment or support. And I'm curious, from your perspective, obviously you know so well the needs of immigrants in New York City today. Where are we seeing that need grow? Are there specific areas where libraries could or should be able to specifically help immigrant New Yorkers and do more, but with more support?
Yeah, so thank you also for including me and for including me, I think, a couple years ago on this discussion specifically around immigrant communities in Queens, which was really robust and dynamic, and I think helped lead to some of what you see in this great report. But I think it's clear to all of us that in general, whether it's an immigrant New Yorker, a new arrival, someone who's been here for decades, we have a trust gap between government and communities. And there's a desperate need, particularly when you might be thinking of someone who might have linguistic difficulty with English, who might have challenges with technology and the literacy of being able to navigate a system online, who might have cultural competency challenges and just making sure that they're communicating effectively. There is a need for services to be delivered and available in a way that bridges those divides. And the council member spoke a little bit about this, where we have this just incredibly difficult bureaucratic system for accessing services. And we saw that personified with the pandemic. Every sort of few weeks, there was a new program that was excellent and in many ways met many of the needs, but they were so difficult to access, and there wasn't a centralized way of receiving that information. And that information, when it was created or developed, wasn't multilingual or didn't address some of these gaps in terms of the computer literacy or other things that folks might need. And we don't have a very good way that's welcoming and that addresses that trust divide in communities to be able to navigate all of those different services and benefits and to address some of those gaps and divides and people being able to get them. And libraries, and in my experience in helping lift up various programs and then also helping to deliver and ensure that there are resources in libraries for immigrant communities in particular, libraries are this incredible mecca where you can not only have folks from the community who speak the language, but there is a general culture of welcome that even if somebody who is inviting somebody into that space might not know the answer, there's an ability to help navigate them to that answer. And we have created these navigation models in the healthcare system. We tried to do so with our Action NYC program, with the immigration system, and they work. They help connect people to services, but that requires a person and it requires an infrastructure that invites that way of interaction and helps to address that trust divide as well as these myriad different gaps that folks have. And libraries are an incredible resource and place where if we wanted to be intentional about making sure that people had that access, that people were able to get the benefits that they're entitled to feel safe, and to be able to address some of these divides, they can serve, but they need additional resources to do that.
Thanks, Pita. Well, we'll come back to, I think, talking about some of those resources and how to do it. But Katie, I wanted to bring you in on one other major challenge that this report really surfaces and highlights, which is libraries' role in potentially helping to close the digital divide. This is certainly an example where this was not a problem that began with COVID, but COVID exacerbated it. It revealed so many of the inequalities in terms of digital access in our city. Libraries, and I think many folks don't know this, have become the city's largest provider of technology training and digital skills training, serving over 160,000 patrons every year. And we mentioned a couple times the idea of waitlist growing. One program in particular, Tech Connect, run by NYPL, fills up in 10 minutes. As soon as they open registrations, they close them again. And the waitlist got to 6,000 people before they said, we can't do this anymore because people can't get off of it. So it just gives you a sense, I think, of some of the scale of what may be needed. But help us understand a little bit more about what is this moment that the incoming city council, the next mayor, is inheriting when it comes to the digital divide in New York, and what do you see as the role of libraries in helping to address it?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it's sort of embarrassing to have the digital divide that we have in this city, just given the resources available, the infrastructure that exists. We don't really have, people talk about the last mile problem of service delivery where people can't get internet because they live too far from service lines. We don't have that problem here. You can get service. I think it's what I call a last 400-foot problem, where if you can't afford internet in your house, you can't sign a contract because of credit, you can't get access to a provider that will actually provide you stable and reliable service. Those things are the problems that we're facing. And then do you have devices that allow you to access your schoolwork, your actual work, applications for programs. And so libraries are providing not just the skills training, but also the actual physical access to digital systems that are not just necessary for people to work or to learn, but more and more so to live, to be a part of society, to learn, where to go to vote, all of these things that are so important. So it is, I think, fundamentally a challenge that we need to think about as being as serious as lack of access to food and water in some ways, right? Like these are the things that people are going to use to navigate to the resources that help us sustain life and be productive members of society. I think that the new mayor and the new administration have a challenge and an opportunity. I like things in threes, and so usually I have three ideas, but I think I just have three words, and they're pay for it. Right? Like we can do these things if we think differently, to everyone else's excellent points about what libraries are. They are important pieces of infrastructure. They are providing services not just for the next generation of young people who will build the companies and have the jobs that sustain the tax base and the city that we live in, but also for older New Yorkers, also for new arriving New Yorkers. So I think there's so much that we can do where tech is a lever, and giving people access to that lever, both with the actual access and the skills that they need, is something that is possible at the libraries because everyone knows where their library is, they know how to access it, but it shouldn't just be yet another thing where we point and say, okay, they'll get it at the library, without thinking about how we actually fund that work.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Katie. And when we were conducting research for this report, we asked the library systems to help us understand how many devices are actually available to lend. Understanding as we talk to educators and folks in technology and employers, saying we need more folks to actually have this at home. That's not just that they can access it at the library. Right now, the library systems together have about 18,500 internet-enabled devices to lend. Sounds like a decent number, but then you realize that there are 777,000 households in New York City without a laptop or desktop computer at home. There are 893,000 households that don't have broadband at home. So, while that's incredibly helpful for thousands of New Yorkers every year who are able to take advantage of it, it's pretty far short of the scale of what's needed. Well, Eric, I want to come back to you on really all of these points. The first point, the key point that you made, which is it's time to focus on how we go about actually investing in these things. Thinking about having moved from making the case to actually making the investment. I'm curious what you think the next mayor should do, but also what you've maybe seen from other cities that's been effective or even transformative at strengthening social infrastructure by investing strategically in libraries. And what do you think is needed?
Right before the pandemic started, I got to go to Helsinki to see this Uda library. I don't know if anyone's been there, seen the images of these libraries. And what I've seen in Helsinki, I actually went to Calgary right before the shutdown as well, are governments that are making libraries symbols and statements about who they are and what they want to be and what they value. And it's been a long time since New York City established a symbolism that we can believe in, that feels like we all kind of participate in it, that we're all part of it. And it strikes me that as we enter into this historical moment, we are going to need something to rally around. And so I think in some ways this building represents part of that. There's something extraordinary about this building. Actually, I think the most beautiful thing in this building is the sign at the very door where you see the hours that it's open. Because the hours of opening in this building, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. was, like literally, I haven't seen that since Scandinavia, and that's something to be proud of. It's a symbolic commitment to access. So it strikes me that this new mayor and all of us in New York need to find something to rally around, something that we can do to come together. And so, this is not exactly crossfire up here. There's not a lot of disagreement in this panel, but I think it's a moment for us to be not arguing with each other, but really digging deep to tap into our creativity and think about what it would mean to mobilize people in support of this idea. So where are we going to go collectively to process this trauma that we've just been through? Like this pandemic has been a trauma, but it's been a trauma that's overlapped with other kinds of trauma, the trauma of racial justice, the trauma of climate change, the trauma of inequality in the city. Our pandemic experience has been organized around those things. It strikes me that we need to find a place to process that, and there's no better place for each of us in our communities to do that than in our branch libraries. So if we want to revitalize branch libraries and make them more relevant from ever, let's come up with a program where people in the city can go and just talk through what we've experienced. And then let's try to mobilize people to make the case for why their branch library matters, like we used to do around those NYC events with the Revson Foundation. And then let's think about this system. And again, it just strikes me that the answer to this is going to be less in the number of anything. It's not about the number of machines or the number of programs or the number of users. We have that data, we know that. We have to be able to tell ourselves a story and tell other people who don't already believe that the library does all the things that it does, that story. And I would love to see some really wonderful brainstorming around that. And I think we need to use the library as a symbol for what this city could be again.
Well, I find that really inspiring, and I personally find the libraries provide incredible solace and refuge in this time, and a sense of hope. I have to admit my own bias as a researcher. I should come on, put my cards on the table and admit my bias in these issues. I've got a 19-month-old at home, and I found out recently he was just named Patron of the Week at the Richmond Hill branch of the Queens Public Library. So, he isn't able to tell me that yet, but Barsha told me. So, wherever the Queens Public Library folks are, Barsha at Richmond Hill, definitely give her a shout out. But she's awesome. But I think you're right. I think part of it is, hey, New Yorkers are already using libraries. We know this. It's not necessarily clear at the highest levels of government the role that libraries do play in our lives, and the idea of that kind of rallying cry. But I wanted to also ask a little bit, and maybe turning to Councilmember Rivera about this, about something very important you said about the ability of cities to also build these new branch libraries that create a sense of pride and welcoming and are modern in ways that our system struggles to keep pace with. You mentioned Helsinki and Calgary. Not only are these beautiful libraries, but they were built at about a quarter the cost of building a new branch library in New York City. I think Calgary was even more like a sixth of the cost per square foot. And this is not because libraries are gold plating all the fixtures. It's because we have a capital construction process that is deeply dysfunctional, that causes projects to take far too long, cost way too much. And frankly, there's a missed opportunity for everything we've discussed today, which is that we can't restore aging branches or let alone build new ones with the limited capital dollars we have with a process that is this dysfunctional. So, Councilmember, I want to ask you a little bit about this. I think you're someone who's invested in libraries, invested in capital for libraries. I know you probably have experienced frustrations from folks in your district when library reservations take a long time. Where do you see the problems in this system right now? And do you feel like there's an opportunity for this incoming councilor or this incoming mayor to make some real progress at long last on fixing the capital construction process?
This is a great question because the procurement, like the contracts and procurement process in New York City is deeply flawed and very frustrating. And if I could fix it, I would retire right now and ask for a renaming of a very big library after myself. But maybe, imagine. So I agree. It is very frustrating, and I will tell you. So I'll give you an example. Like the L train, we finished ahead of schedule. I talk about it all the time when I talk about future construction projects, and I hope that is what is going to be the future. We have the capability, to build in incentives and penalties so people can move faster. But it is already so systemic that I realize, it's really hard to talk to people about how long a project will take. And I agree, a lot of this is Band-Aids, right? The HVAC, or maybe we're renovating a facade to make it more ADA accessible. There's so many things that we have to do for our branches, or fixing elevators, or installing an elevator, which is incredibly expensive. So I think there are some opportunities to start over. That's very rare, but I have one library in my district in mind where I'm like, that's a lot of space on top of it. Like, we could put housing and start all over. But I haven't put that application in, and I don't want anyone to get crazy. But it's something that I think about all the time, because when you mention I think about this with the pandemic. When we moved to telehealth, we left many, many New Yorkers behind. People were not able to go and access their therapist or their doctor. And I think that is something that we'll probably have to incorporate some sort of structure like libraries into. Maybe there's group counseling. There are these support groups for grief. I think I know I personally read books that center on grief, and I feel like they're therapeutic, and there's so many opportunities within the library system itself. But to make it 21st century capable, accessible, open, I do think that the procurement and contracts process is something that hopefully the new mayor can focus on. And I do think with agencies, there are some that are better than others. I mean, a lot of people knock on the Parks Department for taking like forever and a day to do their projects, but they're also, at 1% of city funding? They're incredibly underfunded. And I know you're right, we should pay for it. But we have to start prioritizing what's most important for New Yorkers, for every New Yorker. Something that is there for every single New Yorker, which is that the library, that door is always open to anyone. So I hope that we can fix it. I hope that we can improve it at the very least. And I certainly think that there are opportunities for us to look at some upgrades, but also how can we build these new facilities that are 21st century capable and that are also incorporating some of the other ideas that we desperately need, which could be a health clinic and which could be affordable housing.
That's great. Thank you for that. Bita, I want to ask you a little bit about some of the unfinished business. Maybe it's exciting to be able to talk to someone now that you've left the administration, and I'd love to get a sense from you of what's next. I mean, thinking about maybe advice for your successor. In the Adams administration, obviously a challenging plate. There are innumerable ways the pandemic has hit the city's 3+ million immigrant New Yorkers the hardest. I think we're making a case today that libraries could be or should be an inseparable part of the strategy to support those New Yorkers. But what would be on your list? I mean, it could be things that you started but were unfinished. It could be new things that you think are needed. How should the next commissioner approach libraries?
Yeah, I feel very lucky that in my tenure and time with the city and mayor's office, I built really strong relationships with all 3 library branches across the city, and that was really so that I could do my job better, because there was a clear recognition for me and for my colleagues that we couldn't really accomplish what we needed to without leveraging what existed in the libraries and without the partnership and collegiality of the library systems and having a shared mission around serving immigrant New Yorkers. And a great example and one that sort of dovetails on the procurement issue was launching IDNYC. And it was obvious to us from the start of that in speaking with communities and speaking with our CBO partners and others, that to be successful, to ensure that folks, regardless of their immigration status, felt safe accessing a program and understood that the program was there to serve them, libraries were a central place and pillar to establish that program. And we had to move quickly. We had an ambitious agenda, which was to launch that program in the first year of our administration, and that required procurement to work in a different way. So it's possible when you have the full force of government to do that, but that doesn't address the systemic issues that are there. But we did it, and part of why we were able to do it was because the library system existed, because the spaces existed, because a recognition and understanding of the role that they played within the communities that we tried to serve existed. And when we launched, as many of you may remember, the demand was astonishing, and it really was the library systems that stepped up to say, how can we give you more space and more access? How can we ensure that we're not turning folks away? And that ability to have an infrastructure that is that nimble and has the ability to adapt to a new environment and a new circumstance is incredible, and that doesn't exist across many government infrastructures or agencies, and we wouldn't have been able to expand as quickly and swiftly as we did without that partnership. And I actually made this location my home, as George remembers in the back, for a period of several months, and it was amazing to see the staff respond, to see the ebb and flow of how addressing the needs of communities that were walking through the door for something that the city was offering in partnership with the libraries was just incredible. And we started from that place and sort of saw the potential to do so much more, moving to new American corners in every branch across the city. Then looking at how we could actually deliver immigration legal services. And we have scratched that surface, but we haven't gone as far as we can and ought to go. And it was really only possible because the library systems recognized that there was value, that their staff, I think it was Mayor Garcetti, said, librarians are the best listeners, and I really believe that to be true. Their staff were able to come to the table and share with us what they were hearing the needs of folks that were coming through their doors were, and how they could work with us to be responsive to those needs. And so I think sky is honestly the limit, and everybody, you've sort of heard that thread across all of us, that more resources and being creative with how those resources can be harnessed to expand what the libraries are doing that they know that they're doing well, but then to take us even further and to recognize that there are some places where the existing government infrastructure isn't responding to the needs as swiftly, as rapidly, as welcomingly as they need to, but libraries can do that, and they're a part, an extension of how we at the local level function at our best. And so we have to recognize that, and I think there's so much more that can be done, whether it's through service delivery, whether it's through English literacy, and so much more that the libraries are already doing really, really well, and we've literally, like I said, just really scratched the surface of how much more that they can do across all the branches.
Katie, I want to ask you about another area of potential consensus up here, but maybe with a little twist. I mean, Eric mentioned generally a consensus about the power of libraries, how important libraries are for New York. I think there's another consensus, maybe even a broader consensus right now, that the New York City that the incoming city council that Mayor-elect Adams wants to build needs to be different than the New York City that existed prior to the pandemic, that there has to be a more equitable city created in the future. I think there's a lot less consensus about how to do that. What exactly that would entail, what the specific levers are that should be pushed, or the policies that should be implemented, or even the specific areas of greatest need where if the goal is a more equitable city for the future, this is where you should focus your time, your attention, your resources. So I'm curious, what's on your, you mentioned, potentially maybe you've got a 3-part list. Pay for it is definitely number one. But I really want to kind of ask you, pay for what? If you were going to give this advice kind of directly to these incoming leaders of New York City, where would you focus their attention to help drive a more equitable future? And how would that intersect with the ability to fully harness libraries?
Yeah, thanks. Just give me the whole question. I think so. Under the pay for it umbrella, I think there's probably a few things, right? The first actually speaks to one of the recommendations in the report, which is as we're thinking about ways to integrate libraries into service delivery or revitalization plans or anything else, we need to think about funding associated with that. So not just, again, like they'll get it at the library, but they'll get it at the library because we're going to make sure that the library has the funding to stay open, enough hours to provide it to them. And so that piece for me is it's about connecting those dots in a real way, a practical way, and saying if you're going to integrate branch libraries into your planning for how something's going to get done, you need to be sure that one way or the other there is budget aligned with doing that. The other thing I think, and I like 10 million props to the council member for bringing up procurement and contracts, because most people don't want to touch on the deeply unsexy parts of the bureaucracy that are complex and boring and don't allow you to actually, solve anything, right? Like you can't get a quick win talking about procurements and contracts. But I do think that if the new mayor wants to be New York first, wants to be here because this is the job that he wants, and he has said this is the job that he wants, right? This has always been the job that he wants. This is not about anything else. Then he can take a blank sheet of paper and figure out what the right way to do procurement and contracts would be and compare that against what we currently have and figure out how we can start to adjust and change some of those things, right? I don't believe that we can solve it all, but I do think that we can make really great steps if we actually put our heads down and think about, okay, these are the things that would actually make a functional system that would get things done for people. And the last piece I think is just to have an open-mindedness and to hear from community members about what their needs are. So one of the things that I think is incredibly important about infrastructure, and this is not an original idea, much credit is owed to Eric and others whose work is cited in the white paper we produced on infrastructure a year ago, but we need to think about communities designing for communities and not just what we up on a stage or we powers that be believe is important, but what people are telling us and showing us they need. And you get that information at the ground level, you get it in local government, you get it at the branch library, you get it from actually opening your doors in a meaningful way and opening your ears in a meaningful way to people's needs, not just, speaking of the L train project, I remember, because at that time I was on the community board in Ridgewood, we had public comment meetings about the L train plans, but that was after the plan was already baked and it was an open forum for complaints. And that's not what I'm talking about when we talk about community design of infrastructure. I'm talking about before the plan has been written down, gather that input and understand what people are looking for so that you can design for them. So there's 3, right?
That was definitely three. Three with the bullet. I want to ask about one other particular challenge that the city's facing right now. We haven't really touched on it yet today, and that's the challenge of helping get more New Yorkers back to work. We have an economic crisis that is still unfolding. Unemployment is still nearly 9% in New York City, double what it was before the pandemic. Nearly 350,000 New Yorkers as of last month are still unemployed. Many others have slipped out of the labor force entirely, especially many women. We don't think that libraries can solve all of this, but it strikes me that there is a key role for libraries around helping New Yorkers get back into work, get on the path to better jobs, the kinds of careers that folks are saying that they want. And I'm curious, really an open question for everyone, how do you see libraries fitting in with this huge challenge around unemployment and the future of the city's workforce?
I keep looking at these charts that I've got a bad seat here because I'm just staring at these charts, and there's a chart that's going to come up in a few seconds, I think, or minutes, who knows, that shows the budget of all the different agencies. And you see, it's there because you can see how little goes to the library. And you see, homeless services and health and mental hygiene, and you see education, and you see aging. And you think about all the work in each of those other areas that happens in libraries, right? And the way in which you can't dissociate the library budget from the budgets from those other things because the library serves that function. And of course, that's also true when it comes to the development of a labor force and when it comes to helping people find jobs. So whether it's, training people for computer literacy so that you have specific skills, or helping people prepare for job interviews, up to, lending outfits and skills. Now we're all looking for this chart to come up. But the chart looks like the library is a really tiny bar, and there's a bunch of other bigger bars, and we're all supposed to feel like that's not right, and it isn't right. You think about people who have been in and out of our criminal justice system with its dramatic overreach, in the last several decades, and how essential the library has been for getting people reintegrated with the paid labor market. And then I think there's a really tough question, which maybe overwhelms the library, which is how to provide support for mothers who have been given so much extra domestic work by our society, right? My colleague says, other countries have welfare states, America has women, and mothers specifically. We have delegated this work to women during the pandemic, which has been crushing. So I think there's a very specific challenge that we face out of the pandemic. Let me mansplain a little bit, which is how are we going to provide support so that women can get back into the paid labor force and not be stuck with domestic responsibilities. It seems to me like the library has to be a key player in all of those things. And here I think the fact that libraries are trusted institutions is something that we really need to kind of lean into. There just are not a lot of physical places, government agencies, and human service workers like librarians who have the trust of such a wide swath of New Yorkers. And so it's for all those reasons that I think the library could be a crucial institution for the very challenge that you raise here, right? Getting people back to work, even if it means working from the library sometime, because remote work is going to be part of our future, and libraries play that role. It was exciting to see that architectural innovation of transforming the space so that you can get more kind of work sites inside of libraries. I guess I just feel like the way we have of allocating responsibilities to different agencies based on their explicit task, it works for a lot of agencies and it doesn't work for the library. And so as we enter it, as we kind of build up this kind of argument for what, the case for investing in libraries, I think we have to be really explicit about all the ways in which libraries are contributing to these essential services, including labor.
Thanks, Eric. I wonder if anybody else wants to jump in on that point. And Katie, I'm partially looking at you because I know you make a lot of crucial investments in the workforce space, but I'm curious if you have some thoughts about how to integrate libraries more fully into that system, or if there's areas of need where you think they could play that role.
There it is, quick, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a version with dollars as well as percentages
Take a
too,
picture,
so.
yeah.
That's a sad slide.
Picture.
Tweet that. No, I thank you for that. I think, and this actually comes back to, I mean, COV has produced so many reports on libraries. I think Jonathan's been really preaching this for years and years, and a lot of reading those reports has informed so much of my thinking about this. But I think when it comes to workforce, the opportunities that Eric's talking about to create spaces where people can work and trust that their children or parents or other family members for whom they're providing care can have a place to also be in the library is really important. The opportunity for people to use the spaces to meet and connect with others who are also freelancing or starting a business, right, is also great. I think additionally on the training front, because we've invested a lot in sort of workforce training programs, there are opportunities for libraries to help create bridges between different sorts of programs. So there are lots of nonprofits and lots of other sort of certificate programs or credit bearing but not necessarily attracted degree programs within CUNY and other places that will allow you to acquire skills, especially in tech, that help you get that next job or that first job. There's not clear roadmaps because these are not traditional higher ed programs inside of institutions. There are not always clear roadmaps from how you get from a program that's teaching you basic tech skills to something that's teaching you some more advanced skills that are going to help you level up. And so I think libraries as navigation systems, as resource centers, can help provide people with the information they need to chart their own pathways. We've also seen in some other work that we funded the power and potential for libraries to help create spaces for people to learn in cohorts or groups. So really leveraging the power of online programs and bringing them into the offline world with people having support systems of group learning. And we funded some work with a group called P2PU that has really leveraged libraries across the country to help create these learning circles where people are succeeding in online courses together because they have that cohort and that sort of study group.
I'd like to jump in on this.
Please.
This is something I tried to do unsuccessfully, so I can own that in my tenure. Which is to say that, you saw that slide, libraries were 0.4%. Small business services was also 0.4%. And that's the only place where there was any really developed thinking around workforce development in city government. And this was like, one of the banes of my existence because immigrants who often come here, there's no really good pipeline, right? The federal government sort of just drops you in, right? There's no welcome, here's how you get healthcare, here's where you can go to work, learn English or whatever. There's nothing. And so all of that is sort of left at the local level to be solved for. And at the local level, we don't really have anything that is sort of either a welcome center or a New American Corner or what have you to say, come in. What are the ways that we can make sure you're on the right track? Or if you've been here for over a decade and you want to switch jobs, what are the ways we can make sure you're on the right track to going where we need you? Because in New York, we know we need folks in technology sectors. We know we need folks in the healthcare sector. Like this is stuff that the data shows and that the private industry and what have you has also shown us. And we don't have programs. We literally do not have programs that help move people through these systems. We don't have programs that help people who are doctors in their foreign country and arrive here, become doctors here through a credentialing process or through a pathway to realizing those successes. And there isn't a lot of, I don't know if it's sexiness or juice behind these longer term sort of programs and thought processes about how you move people, because it might not be something that's realized in a mayor's first term. It's probably something that's realized a decade later, where you have moved somebody through an English language program and through a technology program, and then you've placed them in a job in a sector that is thriving in the city or that is growing. And so that's it. We have to look at these investments and look at the ways that we think about infrastructure like libraries in meeting the needs of those longer term investments and recognize that that's not going to be a win that you can campaign on. And that's part of the challenge that we have and the way that we talk about it and the way that we try to ensure that we have buy-in the community level and people can see what that progress is.
Get beyond groundbreakings and ribbon cutting.
Yeah, exactly.
Councilmember, go ahead, please.
No,
I would love you to jump in. Yeah.
I was just going to say about workforce development, because I know Andrew Roche is here, and I have to shout out our Digital Skills Training Center with Civic Hall. Not everyone can bring a workforce development center to a transit-rich area. I realize how incredibly lucky our district and how important this project is going to be. But that project in and of itself is not going to solve our workforce issues. It's not going to get women back to work. There's childcare. There are so many other issues. There's paid leave. I for one, think the paid leave is for families. It's for sick. It's for if a woman has a miscarriage. There are so many things where we need a little bit of time to heal that we don't allow ourselves. I think that the culture in this economy doesn't quite incorporate. But I think when it comes to something like Civic Hall, we're going to need also a pipeline into that center. So we fully expect our libraries to be one of these places where people learn of the resources that will be within that center. And of course, we have amazing partners like FedCap and CUNY, which also serve a very specific population of historically disenfranchised and marginalized communities. But we also know, right, the small business development is going to be important. Hospitality isn't going anywhere. Retail, tech, healthcare, those are all industries that are here to stay. So while tech is at the intersection, I would say, of every single industry, my sister, the concert venue manager / bartender, she uses tech every single day. So I think that there's going to have to be this kind of reckoning of how do we face these issues very intersectionally. And I think where you reach people at the most basic level are in these spaces. So, and again, that's a lot to put on libraries. It's like, oh, you got to tell people where to get trained and how to learn to read and like how to be friendly. That's a lot to put on libraries, but I think that it is a collective investment and hopefully, again, the COVID did lay bare these disparities, and I hope that we actually invest in solutions.
Actually, just really briefly, since we're talking about labor and we're talking about the work that libraries do, I do think it's important for us to recognize the specific role of librarians as laborers and the fact that because they are working with mental health issues, they're working with the unhoused population, they're working with an older population, they're working with a younger population, they're working with teenagers, they're asked to do an extraordinary number of things around the clock and to respond like, how can I help you? They deserve better treatment. And so in the plan, in the plan for the future of libraries and the building and the new infrastructures where they need HVACs and they need the elevators and they need accessibility and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we really have to take care of the human beings we rely on. Librarians, information specialists, branch managers, they are doing tremendous community service work. And they need to be recognized and respected and fairly compensated and taken care of. And I say that in part because, I grew up in Chicago in the 1970s and 80s, and there's a future in which cities look more like Chicago in the 70s and 80s, and there's another future in which cities look a lot better than that. And so Chicago had invested a lot in public resources. And when I was a kid, the parks were in terrible shape, the playgrounds were in terrible shape. We had cut the budget for libraries in the name of austerity because we had other priorities. And the libraries were closed most of the time, and the librarians weren't paid very well, and people didn't use them. And we squandered collectively an opportunity to take advantage of a resource that we had inherited as citizens of a great city. And it took a long time to figure out that we'd gotten that wrong. And Chicago's doing a better job right now, although they're very far down. They might be at the bottom on per capita library spending. But New York can't let that happen. New York can't let that happen. We have to recognize what an extraordinary resource we have in our library system and what extraordinary human resources we have in the people who work in them. And so I really hope that at the end of the day, we take advantage of what could be an amazing opportunity to do something far better than what we've had so far.
Thanks, Eric. I want to ask one last question. I think that's really on that exact note. It's really that's the question. What do we need to do to take advantage of libraries in this way, or to put it differently, what do we need to do to make sure that we're not having the same conversation a year or two from now, but that it's a conversation where we can assess the gains that we've made by investing in libraries, by expanding their ability to serve all of these different communities, to meet all of these growing needs. And maybe I'll start with you, Councilmember, if you don't mind, because you're sitting in government today. What do you think that New Yorkers should do, that activists should do, that the libraries themselves should do, that philanthropists should do? What is going to be effective in actually changing this conversation in ways that create a new level of investment?
You probably have to pick an initiative, a few initiatives, and focus on them. One of your recommendations on the slides was to create these teen centers in some of the hardest hit communities, which I think is really important in terms of where these communities that are underserved and these young people, how do we get them skills? How do we teach them about public health and healthy relationships? That can happen inside of a library, but to create a teen center, that's going to take real investment and intention. So I think by picking a few key initiatives that I think we can all agree on, that is fully in the capacity of the library, because like I said, we put a lot on you. You have to be social workers and speak to people that are unhoused and try to get people on the computer and learning how to navigate some of these websites. I think that'll kind of be a really great focus. And then in terms of, besides procurement and contracts, right, trying to figure that out little by little and chip away, if we are going to create these centers that are built for the 21st century and we are thinking about how to incorporate what we desperately need, I think there are opportunities there to incorporate or to create some areas from scratch or renovation that have affordable housing, that have health clinics. I know those are capital dollars, but there's also room there for public and private partnerships through philanthropy, through real estate, through a lot of other ways to bring that money in and create something that is very, very, I think, holistic in many ways, but that serve so many things that we desperately need, which is, I also always say, it's like the 4 things that we have to address for individuals are housing, healthcare, food, and education. If we're not providing that to every New Yorker, then we are failing the city. So I think that's where we start. Pick initiatives, invest, and take some key recommendations from people who put a lot of thought and brought experts around the table to actually create these solutions.
Well, you all heard it here first. Couldn't have said it better myself. On that note, I hope you all join me in thanking our amazing panel. Thank you all so much. It's really a pleasure.